We've got a small problem with the way our modal dismiss button and modal open button work, and I can demonstrate that by adding an onClick handler to our button for opening the login modal. So if I say onClick, and then we're going to do something. Normally you'd fire off analytics or do something like that. We're just going to say alert, hello, we'll hit save, and then I'll come over here, we'll click login, and you'll notice I didn't get my alert. Now think for a second why that might be happening. I am passing this onClick to this login, and actually if I pull this out and render it outside of the modal open button, let's click that first one, and that one's working, so you'd assume that this one would do the same thing. But the reason that this is happening the way it is because the modal open button is going to make a copy of that child, which is the button, and it's going to override the onClick prop that this child already has. So what we need to do is if this child has an onClick prop, we want to also call that onClick prop in addition to doing what we're doing here. So basically what I need to do is I need to make this function do both the setIsOpen, and then if the child props onClick exists, then we'll call that function, and we'll come back here, click login, we'll get that alert, and we'll get the modal popping up. And we'll probably also want to take all of the arguments that are passed to this onClick function and forward those along right here so that the fact that we're overriding the onClick from the child is non-observable. Now we'll want to do the same thing for this one as well, but I want to create a little abstraction for this just for the fun of it. This is a function that I wrote in Downshift when I ran into this exact same problem, and we used this function all over the place. So we're going to call it callAll, and it's going to be a function that accepts any number of functions, and that's going to return a function, and this function is going to accept any number of arguments, and when this function is called, it's going to take all of those functions that we had in the first place, and for each of those functions, if that function exists, then we'll call that function with the args. This is effectively doing the same thing that we're doing here. We have a function that takes any number of arguments, it calls our function, and then if this function exists, it will call that other function with all of those arguments. With this abstraction in place, we can now assign onClick to the function we get back from callAll, and we'll pass this function to setIsOpen, and then we'll pass child.props.onClick, and if that function exists, it will also get called with all of the arguments that this onClick is called with. I like the way that looks a bit better, so we're going to paste that here and set that to true. And let's make sure that this is still working, which it is. Very good. So in review, what we did here is make this little abstraction here that is a function that accepts any number of functions, and it returns a function that accepts any number of arguments. And then when that's called for each of the functions that were passed, if that function does exist, then we'll call that function with all of the arguments this function was called with. If this bit is a little bit confusing, that's okay. You can rewrite this yourself into something that makes a little bit more sense, or you could just inline it like we were doing here if you find that to be slightly simpler. But if you do end up running into this problem a lot, having a nice abstraction like this is really handy, and that's something I learned firsthand when I was building Downshift.